Hello and welcome to Take Two, the programme that takes a second look at the big issues. I'm Fran Anderson. Today we have Linda Kaucher in the studio. Linda is an expert on the various world trade treaties being pushed through by the big corporations. And then we have a report from Roy Hunter on GM crop approvals by the EU. But first, here are some news shorts. Chancellor Angela Merkel has endorsed what could turn out to be crucial two strategic responses to the NSA spying scandal. Unlike France's Hollande, who recently told the media that mutual trust had been restored and who is widely seen as a puppet of Washington and Tel Aviv, Merkel is proving to be made of sterner stuff. Merkel is from the old East Germany and must be deeply disturbed that totalitarian tactics made notorious by Hitler's Third Reich and later the Communists are being adopted by the NATO powers, i.e. the US and the UK. Merkel's first proposal is for a European internet run by non-US companies who will not be forced to apply the unconstitutional orders of Washington's secretive FISA court. By the way, it recently emerged that the draconian court order issued by FISA went out for years before the court even bothered to write an opinion to justify them. However, Edward Snowden has commented that the NSA has the capability to penetrate any setup like this. Merkel's second plan, which could prove even more important in the long run, is to expand the brief of Germany's counterintelligence effort to include all countries, whether or not they are classed as friends. This essentially recognises that the current and likely future Washington regimes are no longer friends. This has come after Germany tried to reach a mutual non-spying deal with Washington, a deal which Washington rejected with thinly veiled contempt. The mainstream German news magazine Der Spiegel reports that two of Germany's major spy agencies are to be retasked with counter-espionage against the Anglo-Saxon spy network. This will mean the tracking US spies as they try to subvert Germany, identifying US assets and agents of influence in the German establishment. But it's through blackmail and bribery of key players in the political and media establishment of foreign governments that US power operates. If Merkel is serious, she'd better watch her back. She would not be the first enemy of Washington to meet an untimely end. Watch this space. There's a visionary book from Paul Craig Roberts. Paul Craig Roberts has been awarded the French Legion of Honour. He's been an editor of the Wall Street Journal, an assistant Treasury Secretary, a senior professor at Washington's Georgetown Institute, but you don't see any of his opinions in the mainstream media. That's because he has broken the big taboo, questioning the official 9/11 story. Roberts' position is a little more cautious than some of the high-profile 9/11 skeptics, but should be all the more persuasive. Why has there been no real investigation? 9/11's been used to justify endless wars, the introduction of a high-tech police state, and yet when it comes to almost any detail of the official story, there are gross impossibilities along with official refusal to release the information which could clear them up. As one-time Washington insider Robert asked the killer question, why did the media enforce de facto censorship on important unresolved aspects of 9/11 events, which according to the official story have given a huge propaganda benefit to the US? Why haven't they done what the media usually do in these circumstances, keep the story going with endless documentaries on one aspect of the events after another, reinforcing the propaganda value and putting the doubts of cynics at rest? This is what the publishers say about Roberts' book, and it's barely an exaggeration. Few American commentators have cut more clearly through the deepening deceit, hypocrisy and criminality that has infested official Washington since 9/11 than Paul Craig Roberts. His scathing critique sheds much needed light on the country's impending nightmare economic collapse, internal repression, ongoing wars, rising rejection by friends and foes alike. How America Was Lost marks Roberts as one of the most prescient, courageous, moral commentators in America today. So now we have Linda Kaucher, who's been researching into international trade for many years and is part of the Stop TTIP campaign. So Linda, could you explain what the Stop TTIP campaign is?
Okay, TTIP is the US-EU Free Trade Agreement. So TTIP stands for the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. That's where the TTIP comes from. So this is a supposed trade deal between the two biggest economies in the world. The first thing to realise is it's not about trade. it's about corporate rights, it's about corporations having rights. So it's corporations and people.
So who was it that designed the TTIP? Whose idea was it, and who is trying to promote the TTIP?
It's being promoted by transnational corporations. That's who it's for, and that's who promote it, and that's who benefits from it.
And what exactly?
And particularly the same old financial service corporations. So the City of London Corporation has a big role in this because it's a global centre for transnational financial services.
So what exactly would the TTIP do? How would it change our lives?
Well, it's got the usual free trade stuff of trading goods, trading services, which is about corporate rights anyway, and intellectual property, which is about corporate rights again. But this agreement has much more than that. The main part of this agreement is regulatory convergence between the US and the EU, and that sounds like pretty dry and remote and boring, but it means the whole all the standards and the frameworks of the legislation in the US and the EU coming together, but coming together in a way that is, as the agreement's driven by corporations, coming together in a way that is corporate friendly. So overall, our standards that have been achieved, which are generally higher in the EU, being brought down to a lower level. So for instance, in health and safety, in food safety, in accepting genetically modified food, in accepting the hormone beef that is eaten in the US and the chlorinated chicken that is eaten in the US. This is the sort of things it means in food. In chemicals, the US standards are lower than the EU standards, so accepting higher levels of pesticides in food. We've seen what data protection is like in the US, so that's something to be sorted, whether we will be accepting those sorts of standards in that. Public services, if you think about bringing together the model of EU public services with the US model of public services, for instance, public broadcasting. The National Health Service, although this agreement was just launched last year, it's been in the pipeline for a long time, and particularly this regulatory harmonisation part of it. And the NHS, with the changes in the NHS and the Health and Social Care Act, means that the NHS has already been harmonised with the US corporate benefit model. So the Act has lined up the NHS for that sort of corporate snouts in the trough model. The difference that the TTIP will make will be that once the trade agreement is signed up and the NHS is in that, then there can't be any reversals of what the Act is giving us and the changes in the Act. So we can't reverse to, however disastrous the Health and Social Care Act at the national legislation level proves to be. Once it's signed up in a trade agreement, it can't be reversed. And another part of this TTIP is that it's going to include what's called Investor-State Dispute Settlement, ISDS, which allows corporations to sue the government for any loss of future profits if there are any changes. For instance, any attempt to reverse enforced commissioning in the NHS. So any changes like that would mean that would leave us open to being sued by the corporations.
But for the corporations to sue the government, doesn't that mean that we'd have to have a change in the law over the rules governing corporations being able to sue the government in the first place?
The EU Commission has competence for negotiating trade, and that got strengthened with the Lisbon Treaty, but nobody talked about that at the time. So this is beyond, the trade negotiating is beyond the national, and it's done by the EU Trade Commission. And then when, in terms of the law that it's fixed into, the international trade law is beyond national law and beyond EU law.
So would you say that the important thing to concentrate on at the moment is to try and stop the NHS from being lumped into this agreement.
Well, there is certainly a very broad call to exempt the NHS from the TTIP in case it goes through. Obviously, we'd like to stop the agreement. Calling for the NHS to be exempt does two things, really. It makes a trade agreement, which for a lot of people is very remote and hard to understand. It makes it very understandable. If you say you know what's happened to the NHS and this will make it irreversible, it makes it easy for people to understand. So it's a good way for awareness of the trade agreement. And also the call for an exemption is a backstop if the agreement does go through. We really need to have the NHS exempt.
So this care data scheme that NHS England has just sent loads of leaflets in some people's front doors about is all to do with TTIP. Is that correct?
It could be information that's very useful to insurance companies. Insurance companies have a very big role in the changes to the NHS, I think.
So is there any international action against this TTIP?
Yeah, there's groups across Europe and across the US working together to try and stop this agreement. Yeah, there's another agreement going on at the same time, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is very much the same inclusions, the same aims around the Pacific, 12 countries around the Pacific. So the two together set up a real global bloc, and it's a stated intention for them to set global trade rules that other countries can then be pulled into separately. With the WTO, you see, the structure of the WTO allowed countries developing countries particularly, to kind of team up to resist this corporate agenda that the Western governments like ours push. So this is a different strategy to create this very big bloc of much of the world's GDP, and then pull those other countries in separately in a way that they can't team up to resist it.
So how can we fight back? I mean, is there any hope? Because it sounds quite dismal. The situation sounds quite dismal, that the corporations are just becoming one great big huge tyrant.
Well, that's their plan, yeah. Well, finding out about this stuff is a real first step. I mean, for me, we have a Stop TTIP campaign here now, stopttip.net. And it's really exciting to see, especially because I've been doing this for a long time, and it's been hard to have interest in trade. It's exciting for me to see that people becoming literate in trade and knowing what they're talking about and knowing what they don't want. So that information spreading is an important part. But it's important to see the trade agreements that have not gone through. Like the free trade agreement of the Americas did not go through, the MAI, the multilateral agreement on investment, did not go through. The EU commences negotiations with a lot of countries, and they go nowhere. It doesn't go through.
So how about MPs and MEPs? How aware are they of the implications of TTIP, and is there any hope of them coming on board, questioning and trying to stop the ramifications of TTIP?
I would hope they would. The problem with the political structure now is that MPs have no role in this because it is EU competency. But if we were to really seek an exemption for the NHS, this would need to come from the UK. It would be very much UK business. What's happening at the moment in the Parliament is pretty disgusting, really. There's an all-party parliamentary group on TTIP, which is set up to promote TTIP. Right? That's just about the action. And then there's a House of Lords inquiry going on into TTIP. That's the other part of the action going on in the Parliament. And if you look at the questions that they're asking and who they're having speak in front of the committee, Leon Britton, Peter Mandelson, the CBI, it's pretty loaded.
Thank you very much, Linda.
Thanks.
We'll keep people updated on this as this story unfolds. Europe votes for GMO crops despite overwhelming opposition. The European Commission has voted to allow genetically modified maize to be grown in EU countries. Pioneer 1507, as it's affectionately known, is engineered and produced by DuPont to be resistant to pests. But the EU's own Food Safety Authority has recognised the GM crop's toxicity to other organisms, including butterflies and moths. Out of the 28 EU members, 19 voted against, 4 abstained, and only 5 approved. But under the unbalanced and compromised EU voting system, many think this legislation may be legally binding. Tonio Borg, the European Commissioner for Health and Consumer Policy, which is surely a conflict of interest in itself, said that the Commission was now legally bound to approve the crop. While Greek Foreign Minister Evangelos Venizelos said in a press conference that the debate was about voting intentions and not a legally binding vote in itself. Maybe we should ask our correspondent Roy Hunter, who is right, the European Commission or the Greek Foreign Minister? Roy?
Well, to be honest, Fran, who knows? I mean, if the European Commissioner thinks it's legally binding and the Greek Foreign Minister doesn't think it is, then who am I to be able to make a decision? I just don't know, to be honest with you. Greenpeace says it will be illegal, but DuPont, who produce the crop, has said the EU has a legal obligation to itself, its farmers, scientists and trade partners. So some people seem to think that this is going to be legally binding, and others think it's not really. The problem is here with the EU, we have 2 EU principles and they're both contradicting each other really. We have first of all the precautionary principle, which says that if you've got not enough scientific data to prove whether something's safe or not, the precautionary principle says that you err on the side of caution. Whereas another EU principle is comitology, and what that says is if you don't get a qualified majority, which is 62% of the vote, then it passes anyway. So, you know, the vote didn't go above 62%, so that means that the EU are legally obliged to pass it. We have a cross-parliamentary inquiry in this country. Launching the inquiry, Andrew Miller MP, chair of the Science and Technology Committee, said, GM technology potentially offers an array of benefits, but concerns are being expressed that it is being held back by misuse of the precautionary principle. In this inquiry, we'll be looking at whether such restrictions are hampering UK scientific competitiveness and whether they are still appropriate in the light of available evidence on the safety of GM. So what they're saying is that there's loads and loads of science out there that says that the GM crops are safe. But we all know that the science is now owned by DuPont and Monsanto. They control the science, they control the reporting of the science, and so they're saying that it's safe, but I don't believe it's safe, and 80% of EU citizens don't believe it's safe, and I think it's quite a healthy attitude to mistrust these EU institutions, I think. In the vote, out of the 28 EU countries, only 5 voted in favour, which was Spain, the UK, Finland, Estonia and Sweden. There were 4 abstentions, Germany, Portugal, Czech Republic and Belgium, and 19 against, which was France, Italy, Hungary and lots of others. Yeah.
So Roy, surely with 19 countries against and only 9 voted either in favour or abstaining, surely that's a vote against it, isn't it?
Well, you would think so, wouldn't you? But what happens with EU voting is each country's vote is weighted to reflect the number of their population. So out of the 19 countries that voted against, 12 of them have a population of less than 10 million. So that actually isn't very much, really. And I did my own calculations with some year or two old data, but out of the 19 that voted against, that's only actually comes to 53% of the population of the EU. So this GM crop that we're talking about now, there's already one. There's a Monsanto corn already approved in Europe, but that's the only GM crop approved in Europe for planting. And this is a second one coming, and this is Pioneer 1507, which has been developed jointly between DuPont and Dow Chemical. And what really gets me here, what I really don't understand, because this is going to be a battle, you know, and this is all tied up with the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership deals, which are coming in now. But this Pioneer 1507, it's due to be phased out in 2017 anyway, because the EU's own health experts, health and safety experts, are saying that it's acknowledged to be toxic. Not the crop itself, but what the crop is engineered to be resistant to a certain weed killer, which is called glufosinate ammonia, and the EU acknowledged that is a toxic weed killer, and so it's due to be phased out in 2017. So why pick a battle now over a crop that's going to be, it's not going to be of any use in 3 years' time, because you won't be able to use the weed killer that it's designed for.
Very strange.
It is very strange, isn't it? A little bit of background. There was a decision in 2010 by the European Court of Justice to allow Amflora potatoes, which was developed by BASF. And in 2010 they said that they could grow those, but since it's become apparent that they didn't consult with national experts like they were supposed to, and information has been withheld. So the European Court of Justice has struck that down and stopped them from doing that now. And all over the world, really, you know, Mexico's coming out against GMOs now. Russia's declaring that it's not going to have any GMOs. Poland and Italy as well. So, you know, there is an ongoing thing here, and it does seem to be growing. People are angry about this, and I think people should be angry about this. Back in 1998, there was a British scientist called Arpad Pusztai, and his team, who was working for a university in Edinburgh, and him and his team conducted experiments and found that GMOs caused organ damage, reproductive failure, digestive dysfunction, impaired immunity and cancer. And as soon as he came out with those results, him and his whole team were given the sack absolutely immediately. So we can see the way they operate, and this is why we don't trust them. But Marco Contiero, Greenpeace's Agricultural Policy Director, said, "The Commission cannot ignore the scientific, political and legal concerns voiced by a large majority of countries, by 2/3 of the European Parliament, and supported by most of the EU citizens."
Well, Roy, it seems that they're determined to pass this legislation, but how are they going to manage this when there's so much opposition?
There will be opposition to this. I'm sure there will. I hope there will be anyway. But it's all about these new trade agreements that are coming in. The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership is one between the US and the EU, and then there's another one, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is between the US and 12 Asian countries. But they're both more or less the same thing, really. They're both giving legal parity to the corporations with the people, really, and that's how they're going to get this through. It's all about harmonisation of standards and mutual recognition agreements, which what that basically means is that if you're doing trade with, if there's a group of people doing trade, then it's the person with the least good standards whose standards that you're going to adopt. So, you know, the EU's food and health and safety standards are much higher than the US. But if the US do trade with us, and we do trade with the US, then we have to abide by their standards, and that's got a lot of implications for certainly GMOs. I think that's why they're going to try and That's why they're picking a fight over this, I think. And I also believe that's why Boris Johnson has bought a load of water cannon, because there will be trouble over this. They're going to be very binding, these laws, because if we sign up to it, and we sign up to it before it's even written, really. And the other interesting point I noted, which I'm very keen on, is that GMOs are actually banned from Parliament's restaurants.
Well, if they ban them from Parliament's restaurants, we should be able to ban them from the whole restaurants.
No. One rule for the poor, one rule for the rich.
Well, thank you very much for your report, Roy.
Thank you.
This is Take Two. This brings us to the end of this show. Thanks to The People's Voice for hosting us, and you can check our TV show on our YouTube channel, RADTV UK.